Hello, everyone. You are here for the digital event around consumption forecasting, what RevOps needs to know. I am Matthew Volm, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, a global community of 18,000 plus revenue operators from many different countries, states all over the US and beyond. We have a lot of different programs that we run for our community members. These digital events are one of them. We have a lot of in-person events that we run. We have a Slack group. We have courses in education, a lot of different ways that you can get involved. But to get us started, I'm going to actually hand it off to Greg Lewis, who is the president of revVana, and let him get us going on this topic of consumption forecasting, of which him and Amy are experts. So, Greg, why don't you go ahead, introduce yourself and our panel today, and get us taken away?
Sounds great. Thanks a lot. I'm Greg Lewis, co-founder and president at revVana, and happy to have a associate here from Fullcast. We've got Amy Asman Cook. Happy to join us. She could talk a little bit about their company. Thanks for being here, Amy.
It is such a pleasure. Thank you so much. I really love our partnership, Greg, and I have learned a lot from you about consumption forecasting. So I'm excited to be able to speak alongside the master, and it will be fun to chat about it.
Here's our agenda. We're going to touch on the state of RevOps. There's a lot of transformation outside of CRM, a whole layer of applications and processes that you're all probably familiar with. We're going to dive into the details of consumption forecasting, what we're hearing and seeing in the industry, and open up for some Q&A at the end. So Amy, do you want to give us a little perspective on what you guys are seeing in the space right now?
Good morning, everyone. It's really fun to be in a webinar where everyone's visible and we can all chat with each other. My name's Amy Cook. I am the co-founder and chief marketing officer at Fullcast. We have been very active in the go-to-market space in the past 4 months. We've acquired 3 different companies and are executing an AI platform vision in GTM. We also wrote the book RevOps Advantage, distributed by Simon & Schuster, and that just came out in September. The reason I mention that is because we have done an absolute ton of research in organizational theory and as it aligns to revenue. What we saw, which we found foundational and very interesting, is that RevOps has existed throughout time, in Rome even, and in the Industrial Revolution, and what it means is different to different people. But when we were thinking about like through time, during the Industrial Revolution, bureaucracy was something that was very important. It was the best way to execute a business with department budgets, with silos, with assembly line metrics where everything rolls up to the top. And so that was the standard. Then came digital transformation like a wrecking ball into business. And all of those principles that worked back then no longer work today. And guess who is the one that is making the change more than anyone else? And not just changing the way that revenue is perceived, but changing the way that business in general is done is revenue operations. And so we are actually so excited to be part of the RevOps community and the revenue community because we're able to see and partner with all of these heroes that are not just aligning systems. We're not just getting the data to be shared across departments. We're fundamentally changing the way that business is done. And so to me, that is the most exciting time in history to be part of a revenue team. So we talk about old RevOps having silos, booked revenue, disconnected data, and manual forecasting. And we're moving now into modern RevOps with unified systems and real-time visibility and adaptive forecasting with cross-team alignment. And this brings us into what we're talking about today, Greg, which is now more than ever, the consumption business model is becoming what is tried and true and what is required for businesses to succeed. And we look at AWS as just a premier example of consumption forecasting and how usage-based is becoming the standard. I work very closely with a large healthcare company where that usage-based model has always existed in terms of lab specimens collected. So in every industry, we have consumption forecasting, and we have a need to be able to understand it accurately.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you, Amy. And yeah, we've seen the same thing. Yeah, manufacturing, life sciences, services, those businesses have always had consumption forecasting. And now I think with SaaS and tech, there's in a variety of industries, there is a change going on. And we see it from a lot of companies. And so this is really what we're hearing. We obviously we're a revVana is a Salesforce App Exchange application. We automate forecasting. So we talk to people about this every day. And we often hear the exact same message. This is actually a direct quote from a prior prospect, now customer. And we hear versions of this all the time that, we used to manage and this is in the SaaS and tech space where pipeline used to be king, right? It was pipeline, it was ARR, NRR, and you can get all the stats on your SaaS and tech business there. We see companies in the IT security space, in the AI space, in a lot of different niches now needing to manage usage revenue. It's a change on their business and needs to be a change on the processes as well. One of the interesting things we always like to figure out with companies, as Amy said, the pure plays, you've got your AWS, Snowflake, Databricks. These are companies that were built ground up on consumption or on usage models that are billed variably as time goes on. There's definitely a spectrum of what percent of your business is consumption. And even if you look at companies with light adoption, where the majority of their revenue is fixed on seats, let's just say 30% of your revenue is variable. You've got to forecast it. You've got to plan it. You've got to target it, just like you do pipeline. Otherwise, you're leaving 30% of your business on the table. The other thing that we like to think about on businesses is what percent of your revenue is variable and what's the nature of that variability. Everything from seed and grow type customers, where they'll perhaps sell some seats and then there's usage for some of the services that follow, to light consumption, to full consumption. And there's quite a few companies, running old CRM systems like Salesforce tracking their pipeline in full consumption mode with no guarantee to that revenue. It is because perhaps the revenue is going to ramp over time. Perhaps the revenue is dependent on projects at the company using the storage services or whatever it is. But it can be very, very impactful to the business. And pipeline is still a major factor. But it's not everything, as you can see by the percentages. So let's talk a little bit about revenue forecasting versus sales forecasting. It was funny because probably 5 years ago, as the term RevOps in the whole world that we're living in right now was kind of getting a jumpstart, nobody really talked about the difference of revenue in sales forecasting. Ironically, manufacturers call their ongoing revenue a sales forecast. And us in tech and SaaS often refer to sales forecasting as meaning pipeline. But as we know, not all revenue comes at the time of the book deal. The revenue may come from different channels that are hard to manage. And those channels may be managed in your CRM applications. And at the end of the day, there are always spreadsheets. Every prospect and customer that we talk with is always both excited and embarrassed to show us their very complex spreadsheets. And our message is always, you're not alone. Everybody has this. And so the question we'll throw out there to them is, can you imagine running your pipeline in spreadsheets? Why wouldn't you do that? You'd have to send a bunch of spreadsheets out. You'd have to collect them all back in. You'd have to normalize them. You'd have to make sure people are typing in or selecting sales stages. And it's time consuming. So this is what we call, this is a little busy, this slide, because there's a lot going on, because a lot of you probably have a lot going on. This is what we call the RevOps forecasting data loop. Obviously, there's the world of CRM, CPQ, CLM, conversions of billing. You can throw that in there as well. About 10 years ago, a lot of pipeline forecasting tools came out on the market. There are many of them, AI-based forecasting, listening to email traffic and meeting traffic to guess the probability of an opportunity closing. A lot of products on the market and very commonplace in SaaS and tech, as you know. Now, there's a lot of applications out on the market now today to take care of territories, quotas, capacity, and commissions. Fullcast is a good example of that. All the stuff we don't do in RevOps, Amy's company does. But in the past, as Amy probably will attest, Amy, are you seeing spreadsheets for territory management and capacity planning?
There are a lot still,
Yeah.
84% of people are still doing their territory planning on spreadsheets, and it's becoming really, really difficult to do.
Yeah. And so it presents some challenges. And then with consumption forecasting, we need to grab actuals from NetSuite, from Oracle, from SAP, more importantly, from your company's internal system. If you're running a SaaS or a tech application, the usage is usually tracked by those applications for the customers. So there's a lot of integration, a lot of spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are never going to completely go away, but can present some problems.
Hmm.
The biggest, I'd say, most material problem with consumption forecasting in spreadsheets are manual and lagging processes. Typically, the average amount of time to go, let's just say we're managing an environment with 200 customer-facing sales reps, AEs. Let's say there's another team of 60 customer success people, and there's downstream operations people, perhaps, for services and other things that need to be involved in the process. These lagging processes, it's not just that, wow, it's going to take my RevOps team some of their time. It's okay. They're busy and they work really hard. That's not the issue. The issue is doing things like, and tell me if this is familiar for anybody, taking a snapshot of your pipeline in the middle of the month, then going off into your spreadsheets or Google Sheets and working on forecasts for 2 to 3 weeks. There's an error right there in that 2 to 3 weeks later, that pipeline is old. Gathering numbers for consumption in a spreadsheet by customer that doesn't really break things down by your product families. There's no guidance, such as stages and things like that, that we have come to know in pipeline management. And then the complexity across revenue models. How do we manage pipeline and consumption in one place? Because they're pretty tightly related. If I sell a new customer, I'm going to expect some consumption from that customer and need to start managing it effectively. At the same time, we've actually seen a lot of customers managing consumption with opportunities. It makes no sense to us. Now, if it's an opportunity because there's a major shift, like, hey, we have an attrition opportunity here, we can tell from our consumption that somebody else is going to be providing storage services for our customer. That's okay. But just to manage the ongoing monthly numbers by entering an opportunity, adjusting that amount, we see it all day long. And it's very, very frustrating to sales teams. And then on all of that, just as we manage and try to put pipeline in a tight funnel and have the entrance and exit criteria, right, for the stages in the funnel, by not managing your consumption in a structured process type of way, you're going to end up with a bunch of numbers that probably don't make sense. And they're not going to make sense to your CEO, to your board, and to your shareholders. So definitely a problem worth solving. The last item here on the sheet is demand planning. We've actually implemented revVana doing demand planning for manufacturers running SAP. That makes no sense, right? You think SAP has everything in the world for demand planning or any of the applications around that. Doesn't do one thing, doesn't demand plan new business, right? So really consumption forecasting hopefully can be improved by processes and systems around this.
I will say too, to your point, Greg, just having worked with a number of companies where the consumption forecasting is not in place, it's very frustrating for the sales teams because they put in what they believe their consumption will be. Oftentimes they inflate it, and so then the CRO gets excited about it, the finance team plans on it, and then when it comes in at a tenth of what they had expected, then the sales team gets frustrated. They're not getting the commissions. The finance team is frustrated because it's not accurate. But really, like the sales team has no other option than to make a guess, right? You can look at the historicals from the previous years or previous providers or whatever, but I find that, like that, even the retrospective look, not even the forecasting is difficult.
Yeah, without a doubt. So that brings us to some of the best practices that we're implementing at our customers and best practices that we've often seen. We just had a great conversation. He may be on right now. A pretty advanced storage company we met with 2 days ago had built out a very customized version of our application, but also was following these types of principles. This isn't specific to us. This is stuff that we're seeing companies who are successful on this doing across the board, including some of the leaders at the big companies who've had this built out and these processes defined for years. Number one is model your consumption rules and assumptions, right? As a RevOps team and your associated finance teams, there are definitely assumptions that we are all working with. When we say close $1 million opportunity, what does that mean in the consumption world, right? Does that mean $1 million of usage per year when we're at maturity? Does that mean a goal of 1 million that's in my head, right? All these things. So modeling those rules so when you close a new customer, having a record of what you're expecting in an optimal world, that customer will go to as far as revenue and usage. Baseline that usage expectations and timing, right? If you're a SaaS and a tech company that say is developing a development platform, or you have an AI product, or you have storage, or you're a life sciences company, like Amy said, with some consumable, refillable items that you're expecting to follow a med device sale, there's definitely a timing to those activities. Usually the role of an AE at a pure play consumption SaaS company will be to talk to the team. If the large Fortune 500 customers using our technology, they need to be aware of the timing of their development projects, right? When is the system going to go live and get rolled out and we can really see the usage? Also, define ramps and models by leveraging historical data. The data is there, so you have your business assumptions, you have your data on what's actually happening. By having items 1, 2, and 3 defined, you can really get a handle on your business. And you may change your business model. You may need to change your compensation structure, right? And your commissions for your reps in new models. 1, 2, and 3, though, take a lot of time. It's okay to model. Usually we're taking models and things that customers have been working on and tracking in spreadsheets. But if you can automate it, it's even better. So once you have a model, let's leverage AI and automation in combination with feedback from the team. As far as the voice of the customer and the team, who is that? It's not just sales, it's customer success. We have probably 50% of our SaaS and tech customers have a need to have customer success, have more of a voice in a structured way. So we have things like customer success forecast versus sales forecast. Sounds a little competitive, but you need to really assess what's going to happen with the customer and you need to talk to the whole team.
Just
Right.
different data points, right?
That's right.
Absolutely. So if you think about it, you can have, hey, here's our operational assumption. Here's the budget or target, right, that the company needs to hit, or we planned for this account at the beginning of the year. But yeah, these data points in both automated data and people is the way to do it most efficiently. And then most importantly, segment and layer your revenue forecasts. Number one thing we'll hear is, we're tracking forecasts and we enter in these types of opportunities to represent a downturn in consumption, in this type of opportunity to do this, and this type of opportunity to do this. That captures point in time data. However, all of those customers say the same thing. And we're having a really hard time differentiating between existing business that we had and new business that our team sold, right? And if you sell 1 million in new business, but you're not meeting expectations on 1 million in existing business, that's going to result in not optimal growth for the company, which is not good for anybody.
One of the examples in life sciences, speaking to your point about leveraging historical data to define revenue ramps and models, one thing that we found to be very effective for a number of companies is using the Medicare database. And that's been really helpful for us in understanding those historicals. And if you leverage in what they call a CPT code, which is a billing code that each provider has to use, you go back and it's awesome because the government is doing it all for us, right? And putting together that data, you can go back into that public database, you can look at the historical from the last year, and then you can infuse it into your CRM revVana. We should buy revVana, and then you infuse it into revVana, and then you can have much more accurate data. That's one of the things that I've done with some of these healthcare companies that have been a consumption model, but then they've had difficulty understanding the forecasting process. In terms of the baseline usage expectations, having a very defined onboarding process and not calculating commissions until there are a certain number of usage cases or whatever. In this case, that might maybe a lab specimen is very helpful because then you can help the sales team understand when there's a material difference, right? One specimen doesn't make sense, 20 specimens, you can start calculating commissions. So just to try to bring a little example into what you're saying so eloquently.
Yeah. And also, we didn't talk about it, but going back to SaaS and tech, thinking about usage tiers, right? Spikes or drops in consumption obviously can spur a conversation, perhaps, of upgrading customers to the next tier on their usage models.
That is that
Oh, yeah.
great.
The one thing I'll add, or I guess the thing I liked about what you both said is you always have those examples of if your business is moving to a consumption-based kind of model, or maybe you're bringing on new customers and obviously you're trying to figure out how to project forecasts for them. Obviously, you have their own historical data, but don't forget about proxies that you can use as well. So Amy mentioned Medicare database, if you're in the health and life sciences space. But also, if you're bringing on new customers, if they don't have great historical data for the things that you're looking to project or forecast on, again, look at, hey, do I have other customers similar to them that would be signing up for similar plans, looking to use our product in the same sort of ways, right? Those can all be really good data points for you to help you leverage that historical data point that Greg had on that last slide.
That is a
Yeah.
really great
Great
point.
point.
I used to be the CMO of one of their elite partners. And what we would do with AWS is we would go back to the partners and be like, hey, can you please give us the consumption that you've been seeing historically so we can go to market together because they keep very good data there too. So just speaking to Matt's point about trying to get those historical data sources wherever they can be found, sometimes you got to look at a partner. And in terms of like the tiers, like HubSpot does an incredible job of tiering. I've been using them for over a decade, and it annoys me because I'm a consumer, but for a business model, it's brilliant. The marketing hub based on usage of contacts, right? So however many marketing contacts you've got in your database. Once you go over that threshold, they don't let you come back down. You have to pay for a
It's a
bigger
one-way door.
it's a one-way door and it's really smart. They will let you eventually come down after a time period lapse, but that is another very interesting way to use that. They also have a mixed model that I'm not a big fan of because they just added seats that we have to pay for as
Oh,
well,
boy.
in
I
addition
was
to
not
their
aware of that
consumption.
on our hub.
It's new this year.
So yeah, and back to external sources. Yeah, that's exactly what we do. We'll implement forecast assumptions that are usually coming from ops and finance. We'll look at tiering and generalization of data, based on company size on those things. And then as Matt and Amy pointed out, like manufacturing, you have industry growth industries, right? So manufacturers view their exit rate at the end of year one should roll into growth if I'm selling to, say, farm products industry or something like that, or I'm selling to automotive and there's expected to be a 4% growth there. These companies plan to have 4% growth around there. So there's basically a lot you can learn. SaaS and tech, I think, can learn from manufacturing and life sciences, some of the industries that have done this for a while. So promise not to plug too much of our product, but what does it look like? This is a screenshot of a revVana implementation. It also is very representative of what we're seeing customers doing in their spreadsheets and in other things. They're viewing the consumption. Life sciences typically manages to a quarterly forecast, focus on the quarter and the quarter close, but consumption or usage or product sales all the way around. SaaS and tech also will sometimes forecast around use cases at their customer. So if you see this example here, United Oil and Gas, we've got a stream of revenue that is tightly associated with a phase two rollout. So as the AE for that account, I need to stay in touch with Matt and the rest of the team at United Oil and Gas on their usage of the product to make sure their go live is in line with my forecast that I'm sending up the chain. And then we also focus on the notion, a term that we coined it. We coined it about 4 years ago. It's a thing. You call it revenue yield. We've called it revenue realization. Revenue realization is, are you getting the revenue that you've sold? At the very beginning of revVana, we were at one of our pilot customers having a very heated conversation between sales and finance. And I said, I've got a question for you. The interest in the team was using Salesforce and AI to track pipeline and what's the probability of pipeline closing. I raised my hand at the time and I was in consulting mode. And I said, I've got a question for the team here. Of the revenue that you sell, what percentage of the revenue do you actually see? The sales finance person who was in the room raised her hand and said, I know exactly that number. That number is 50%. The head of sales at the same company in the same division raised his hand and said, well, you mean of our pipeline. You're talking about our weighted pipeline. You take 50% on average, which would be a pretty bad practice anyway, if they did that. And she said, no, of your actual revenue after you've closed a deal. And he goes, oh, I get it. It ramps, right? We ramp a 12-month ramp. So you're counting on 50% in that 12-month ramp. And she said, no. She goes, we count on 50% after it's sold. So why at an organization, the CEO would roll over and get pretty angry if they found out that sales and finance were that far misaligned. So we did the math. I said to this customer, what percentage of your business is new business every year that could be variable, unpredicted usage? And they said, well, it's about 300 million of our 2 billion a year. And I said, finance is forecasting 50% of that. You have a $150 million gap in what you're selling,
Wow.
getting the company. And the head of sales said, no, that's not what I said. The head of sales finance said, that's exactly what we're saying. And we got our first customer. So very proud of the
Greg.
long run, but we were solving a $150 million problem, not a 2% more pipeline.
Absolutely. Well, and when you look at the disparateness, when we were helping to solve the problem between what a sales was forecasting as their pipeline and then versus the actuals, it was a 10 to 1 difference. So getting this right is really important, and it makes a very big difference to these companies and what they can forecast and allocate.
Exactly. And we were just talking to a customer yesterday where, putting this stuff into a system that's trackable and I can see where numbers have changed. I can request reason codes from my team to give me some categories so I can lump these changes into some category, report on it down the road. It is initially viewed as almost too transparent. And, that's going to be work for my team. That's going to be this, that's going to be that. What's a team that's continuing to over forecast or under forecast and throw surprises at their finance department? What's that team doing? Not very well, right? So what we encourage is do the things that other companies are doing to take the first few steps in managing your consumption. Yeah, you'll still have unpredictability at your customers, but at least you'll have some of the guardrails to manage it. I'm going to kind of wrap up here quickly with a few more visuals, and these are just examples. I'd encourage all of you, if there's others that are in this space that are doing things with consumption, we talk to companies all of the time about how they're handling it, not only just to use our software, but often just fleshing out what's a normal practice. We do that all day long. A lot of consumption SaaS forecasting units other than currency and units. You might have target storage capacity. There is a big company that has a lot of companies have their own units, their own tokens, so to speak, that represent different levels of usage, whether it's API calls, storage transactions. Common practice, see it often. Let's talk a little bit about the roles involved. It's not just RevOps. This is bringing RevOps together with sales, customer success, finance, and ops, and doing it in a systematic way. If we can automate most of these forecasts, capture that customer sentiment, we'll get a really good picture of what's going on at our customers and hopefully be able to make informed decisions and help grow our company's revenue. At the end of the day, this is an example of what we see. These percentages maybe are not accurate to your business, but this is a full stack revenue forecast for us, where pipeline may only be this little part here. The consumption for the customers that we've already sold is this blue part here. And then the green part, represents committed revenue. But this is what we're talking about in managing layers and segmenting your revenue so that you can isolate performance. You can absolutely track. Another thing we hear all the time is I can only track revenue back to the account level. I have no linkage especially in manufacturing. SaaS and tech are a little better. Usually they have good linkage to opportunities. I can only manage revenue at the customer level. I can't track it to my opportunity, so I'll never be able to do this. Well, go through this very simple logic. If I'm doing $100 with my customer and I just sold them a new line of services to a new business unit, that should be another $100 in usage. Even if I'm tracking at that customer level, I should be able to see $100 coming through, and at some point in the future, another 100 on top of that. So there's simple math that can be used if our data is in the right places and we're managing it the right way. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to improve forecast accuracy. That's important for everybody, important for reps to meet their commissions, important for companies to survive and grow. Better realization of usage-based revenue. Love to do some studies and math on this at your own organization and how far off the forecasts are from reality. And you might be able to justify a project for yourself. Not that you all need more projects, everybody's very busy. And then obviously automate as much as you can to reduce lag time and reduce strain on the sales team so that they can manage by exception and not have to keep tabs on every single one of their customers. So that is it for our structured conversation today. Matt, we can open it up for any Q&A that people have.
Yeah. I actually have a question for you, Greg. We talked through some ways that people can approach this. We also talked about the fact that a lot of folks and probably a lot of people here are doing forecasting like this on spreadsheets and in a manual way of doing things. And then I think about like, okay, well, where should they start, right? If they have a whole slew of these problems that we just talked through today, like where would you recommend they start? And I don't know if this comes from maybe when you start having conversations with new prospects, what sort of questions do you ask them? But if I came to you and I was like, hey, here's my current business, here's my current process, what should I do to fix it? What sort of questions would you ask, or how would you recommend people approach that starting point?
Yeah, I think the best thing is to start with your organization's top line objectives. What are our objectives? We are 100 million a year company. We're trying to grow to 140 million a year in the upcoming year. And we're doing that through new business and ongoing consumption. So I would take inventory of the objectives of what you're trying to achieve, and then look at your processes, look at your opportunity processes. Everybody's running a CRM system today. Usually we're dissecting opportunity processes and taking things that aren't really opportunities and pulling them out as a consumption event. Look at your historical data to see if there are trends that you can get started before you implement a system and then have to wait 2 years to see what the results are. Start digging in. Everybody has analytics tools and things today. And so start digging into your historical data to see if there are some trends with your customers that you can actually build on. What does a good customer look like? And can we replicate that motion with other new customers?
What are some things that you certainly recommend people avoid? You mentioned, like, I know I heard you mention, like, absolutely do not use opportunities to, and like opportunity values to be kind of tracking these things. Anything else that you've seen either from your own personal experience or from customers, people you've talked to, where it's like, hey, there's potentially a lot of different ways you can approach solving some of these things, but absolutely avoid these, right? These are the things you don't want to do.
Yeah, the number one thing that I think is really frustrating is when people overly customize field after field in their CRM environments, whether that's on the account, on the opportunity. To be really honest with you, they'd be better off actually managing consumption in spreadsheets and doing that. It's a very
Yeah.
non-effective way to do it. And I think avoid thinking that the whole world is out of your control. With the economy like it is, who knows what our customers are going to do with tariffs and this, that, and the other. That's not true. It's your product they're using. You should have control. You should have some knowledge on how they use it. But I would say before you embark on a year of just chopping up your Salesforce or HubSpot environment to plug fields in, you're spending a lot of time on something that really is not going to be a good use of your sales reps' time. So I think that's the number one without going into too many other ones.
Yeah.
Amy, anything to avoid on your side? RevOps in general, Yeah.
Yeah, to avoid, in my opinion, when it comes to one of the biggest pitfalls that we've had was not using the historical data to
Yeah.
make those guesses and relying on the sales team to put in their own pipeline rather than having the RevOps team authenticate it through data. That's the biggest learning from me the past 6 months.
Yeah. So we have a question from Carl around how you think about pipeline reviews, updates, next steps as it relates to forecasting. So Greg, maybe for you, how would you answer that as it relates to, if you think about, I'll say like a standard kind of forecasting sort of process, right? It can be very, time bound, right?
Yep.
Monthly, quarterly, you've got your cadence for reviews, your process. Does that all still apply to when you're doing things on a,
Yeah.
consumption basis or?
Yeah, we're seeing some trends. We're not normally seeing consumption reviews always on a weekly basis, although high percentage consumption usage companies do it on a weekly basis, like Pipeline. But yeah, they're almost always done and submitted up through management and reviewed and discussed on a monthly basis. So usually just like Pipeline, sub teams weekly, overall company monthly. And then in the quarterly cadence.
Mhm.
Okay. Makes sense.
When it comes to the pipeline to bookings to actual in health and life sciences, you always have to factor in the revenue recognized versus received
Yeah.
because oftentimes the Medicare billing is several months delayed. So that adds another layer of complexity between the finance team and the RevOps team.
Great point, Amy. Um,
Yeah. I remember, back when I was in VP BizOps and RevOps, this was pre-AI and usage and consumption, and we were just selling kind of standard software contracts. I saw some chatter too, even about sales compensation and how reps get paid. And Greg, you use this example, right? Someone's like, "Hey, this is $1 million deal." It's like, well, I know what that means to me from a finance perspective. Like, what does that mean to you? Is it $1 million over the course of 2 years? Is that the total contract value? Is that the annual contract value? Like, what actually makes up that dollar amount? And even things like when contracts would get signed versus what the listed effective date was. There's a lot of other things in there that can impact revenue recognition, which to someone in sales, for example, may not be anything that they think of. They're like, oh no, I got the deal signed, right? Like, why does it matter that they signed it 7 days after I sent it to them and that just happens to cross into a new quarter, right? It's like, well, that actually makes a very big difference. All of that stuff gets amplified even more when you start talking about consumption, because now you're literally forecasting everything here, right? And it's like, where do you draw the lines? Whose job is it? Is it customer success to be the forecast owner? Is it the sales rep? How do you pay them? Like there's all these things that you start to think of. And that's really where revenue operations can play a critical role and really being that bridge and that glue that kind of holds all that stuff together.
yeah, that's right. Rather than revenue operations being a responder for sales, hey, I need these reports, I need them now. Revenue operations can really be the toll gate between finance and sales and really elevate in the company. The I'm going to tell an old story that I've told too many times before, but much earlier in my life, I was in high school, like a lot of people were. My dad was busy on a Sunday afternoon digging into spreadsheets. I'm not going to tell you what decade this was, Amy,
It was like just 10
it
years
was
ago.
at least 10 years ago, right? And so my dad's digging into spreadsheets and he was a sales leader at his organization. And I said, Dad, what are you doing? You're in sales. There's football on TV. And he was working on these spreadsheets all night long. And he said, I am trying to come up with a model in my spreadsheets to drive the top line of revenue forecast for my company. And I knew enough about the world from my dad that I said, isn't that the job of finance? And he said, finance has no communications with my customers or my new deals. They don't know what that number is. They're only going to be doing it on history. And the important part that he said was, I feel like the person who can tell the board of directors and shareholders and the CEO where our company is going to be in 4 years deserves a seat at the table. So it really can we can work on things like adoption and making life nice for our sales reps. And we can also, while doing that, work on driving top line revenue for our companies. So it's important stuff.
All right. Well, as we wrap up, I want to hear just one last parting thought, piece of advice, recommendation that you each would have for the group that is here today. This can be on obviously our topic, consumption forecasting, or anything else that is revenue operations related. And Amy, I'm going to start with you and ask you that first.
Thank you. With regard to consumption forecasting, the best thing that I have learned over working with sales leaders on this is to position yourself as the data layer to help serve their interests. To me, that's where I've gotten the furthest and made, you don't want the sales team think you're checking up on their numbers. You want them to see you as a team player that's going to help support their goals. So that would be my piece of advice.
All right, Greg, what about
my
you?
piece of advice, and this is almost a plug for Amy's organization, and I forgot to mention it earlier, territory management, sales compensation, all of those things are tightly related to consumption forecasting. That screen that I showed you that has a listing of accounts, my accounts that I'm accountable for top line revenue forecasts on, where does that come from? That comes from my territory assignments. We, in implementing our software on top of Salesforce, their CRM, oftentimes are subject to using spreadsheet-based territory management things or custom territory management things. So I think all the RevOps topics that we're talking about are related, and view them as related and think about those processes, because there's a lot of really productive changes that we can all make. So
yeah. This has been great. So, Greg, Amy, I want to thank you all very much for dropping some knowledge on us and sharing as much as you did. This was tremendous. To all of the attendees that are out there, thank you for joining us as well. We have the LinkedIn profiles of both Amy and Greg up here. You should definitely connect with them on LinkedIn. Ask Amy, you can see part of her last name there is Osmond. Just ask her if she's got any famous Osmond relatives. See what she says back. You'll get some fun answers. That's all I'll say. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. We're going to wrap up here a little bit early, but we'll see you at the next one. So again, Greg, Amy, thank you very much. But that's all I got for you. I will see you all at the next one. Take it easy, everybody.